have very rarely run any of my RPG campaigns in a pre-existing campaign setting that was provided by the publishers. I grew up with a GM who had his own homebrew world, where the major NPCs might be characters from our previous campaigns. He ran that world for lots of different groups, and what we did in that world had an impact on future adventures, because we were all shaping that world together. So for a long time, that's how I figured D&D should work. I knew not everyone played that way, but honestly, I didn't see the appeal of running in a pre-published setting for D&D when the method that I'd been initiated through worked so well for me. Additionally, the few times that our group ran licensed games like the Warhammer RPGs or Dragon Age, those were franchises I didn't know anything about. So since I was new to this world, it didn't feel particularly different from playing a game in a homebrew world. The only exception was when we played in a Star Wars RPG. I was a player in that game, and I obviously knew there was a whole deep bench of canon in that world. But if I'm honest, that was never something I was particularly worried about. I knew the canon wasn't my biggest concern. Let's be real. When your introduction to the expanded universe is the Glove of Darth Vader and that whole series of books, you realize that canon doesn't really matter all that much. However, the rise of 5th edition D&D and all of these published adventures taking place in official settings like the Forgotten Realms, and the way the community was rallying around these specific adventures, I was actually really excited to start running games using these published settings. I figured I could basically act as like a guide, introducing new players to the wider mythology of D&D through these adventures and also through these campaign settings. I thought it would be really exciting for these players to talk with other D&D players and realize, oh, we've all been exposed to the same adventures and the same settings. That's really cool. So 5e was basically the first time I learned anything about the Forgotten Realms and started running games in that world. However, a couple of things sort of soured my experience for running pre-published campaign settings. The first was that I just did not particularly enjoy running games in the Forgotten Realms. I've talked about that before. I think a lot of the problems are specific to the way that material was presented to a new audience. It's not necessarily the inherent design of the world itself, but it's much more about the presentation of the Forgotten Realms in 5th edition products. Their approach really didn't line up with what I most enjoy about D&D. However, the other bad experience I had with the Forgotten Realms was that when I started running a published adventure set in the Sword Coast, some of my players knew the world better than I did. That was the first time that had ever happened to me, and I didn't really know what to do about that. I'd seen my game master, my first game master, have these debates with players before, players who would argue with him about some aspect of the world, and I just figured, well, those players are both the GM's brothers. The three of them are just going to bicker sometimes. It is what it is. But then in my own game, I had a player who was basically the font of knowledge about the Forgotten Realms, and suddenly I didn't feel that same freedom to run this world the way I wanted to make it my own. And I want to be very clear, my players were actually extremely cool about it. They were excited to play in this world, and they were drawing on information they knew about the setting. They were excited to bring up that information because they thought it was relevant to the game, and they thought it would enrich the game experience. I was not having a bad experience because of the behavior of my players at the table. I want to make sure that's very clear right off the bat. But the moment they started discussing lore that I had not presented to them, and they started talking about something that I hadn't mentioned, or maybe I didn't even know about, I suddenly felt this wall come up around myself, and I started feeling, I guess it's the closest I've ever felt to imposter syndrome. That's not really a feeling I get very often. Most of the time I have far too much ego to ever feel imposter syndrome, but like in a healthy and normal way. But when I started running a campaign in a world I didn't know as well as my players did, suddenly I did feel like I was one simple mistake away from shattering the illusion. Granted, this is the definition of a me problem, but when I'm running the game, it was really getting in my way. See, I believe that when you're running a D&D game, part of your job is to make it seem like you have all the answers, like you know what's behind that next door, even if you don't. And even though my style has shifted quite a bit since then, and we'll talk about that more another day, but I still do feel like if you get the world wrong for players who know the world really well, it can absolutely pull them out of the game and I think break the illusion that you have all the answers, which if you're running a more simulationist game, like especially D&D is, that can be a lethal blow to your players' ability to immerse themselves in the game. For example, maybe I'm running a game and I say, okay, you arrive at Waterdeep City Hall, ready for your appointment. Well, a player who knows the world better than I do might respond,
Just FYI, there's no such thing as a Waterdeep City Hall. We actually would probably have our meeting place at the Palace of Waterdeep, or the Lord's Palace, or Peregrine's Palace.
Now, that was by no means a problematic thing to say. Trust me, there are worse examples, and we can talk about them later. But now I feel like someone at my table knows that I didn't do enough research. Or worse, they might start to wonder why I'm running a game in this setting if I'm not passionate enough about it to study up. And for a long time, when I was running games in something like the Forgotten Realms, I didn't know how to solve this problem. My best option, as far as I could see, was just to not run games in any campaign setting that my players might know better than I did. If I was going to play in a pre-published world, like I started doing with Collaborus earlier this year, or late last year, I think it may have been, But part of the appeal would be that my players didn't know that world very well. And plus, the setting of Calabris is so open-ended to begin with, I had a lot more freedom to make it my own. It's very hard to contradict the lore when everything official about that world fits into a 5-page PDF. And if there was a more detailed world that I wanted to run games in, like potentially going back to the Star Wars universe for a campaign, then I would want to do some homework beforehand. I would want to catch up with a lot of the new canon, the cartoons and the Marvel comics that have been published since 2015, and I want to refresh myself on all the Disney Plus shows, that kind of stuff.
Did you know that Kiandi Mundi had a canonical birthday and they changed it for the Acolyte?
Because there are certain types of nerds out there who may be lovely people, but the idea of running a game for them where they know the world better than I do twists my stomach into knots. But then I was checking out my copy of the Batman Gotham City Chronicles RPG, and I was flipping through the rulebook, and I found one of my favorite chapters I've ever read in any TTRPG book ever. And this is advice that I really think should be in every published campaign setting. How do you run a world that you don't know that well, and what do you do when your players know that world better than you? This book has those answers. If you like this video and you want to see more videos like it, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell. Ringing the bell means you'll get notified every time a new video comes out. And then if you watch a video right when it comes out, that actually helps the channel a whole lot. It sends that video to more people, and that just helps me out a lot. So if that's something that you are passionate about, if you want to watch these videos and you want to help me out, ring the bell. Now, part of the reason I love this book so much is that it makes a fantastic assumption. Does not assume that you are an expert in Gotham City, so it tries to give you all the information you need to run your games in that world. And I'm choosing those words very carefully. The game does not assume you need to know everything about this world. Now, it does come with a whole Gotham City guide, and that has a lot of very useful information about this setting. So, there is a very detailed setting guide. But the focus in the core rulebook is on what you actually need to know about the setting in order to run your own adventures there, which means it does not focus on lore or canon. Instead, their first priority is vibes. Basic principles. If this is your first game, go around the table and ask the members of your group what they know about Gotham City and its inhabitants, superheroes, supervillains, GCPD officers, journalists, etc. This will allow you to judge to what extent you'll have to describe certain places and characters. Next, remind them of some of the game's key elements. The principle of minimal difference to real life for all the everyday elements, level of technology, the price of objects and services, etc. The idea of an alternate America, where there are familiar elements but using well-known names from our reality is to be avoided. The importance of assuming responsibility for one's actions. Keep in mind the underlying rules of comics, even if there is no need to remind your group of them. They will be especially useful when leading a game session and writing your own scenarios. Masks are worn for a reason. The weather is only there to set a mood. The anonymous die, the famous come back. Scare 'em, don't kill 'em. Give vanquished supervillains a way out. Realism is great, action is better. And we'll sleep when we're dead. This is not just useful advice for making your adventures feel like they match the world you're trying to recreate, but also understanding why it works the way it does. It's not just about details and data. That's the whole of the book in this collection, and don't get me wrong, it's a very cool, very valuable resource. But it's all meaningless unless you understand the why. Why is this world designed the way it is? What purpose does that serve for the narrative? Gotham City is the perfect example of a setting that only exists to generate more stories. There's basically no detail of that setting that just sprung up organically. They were all very deliberately designed either to serve a specific story or to help generate lots of future potential stories, to be part of the story engine of Gotham City. So if you understand why the setting is built the way it was, that's the first step in understanding how best to bring this city to life. The next step is actually figuring out how to characterize this location within your game. How do you bring it to life? More specifically, how can a very large location provide lots of different inspirations for different adventures? Urban atmosphere. With its diversity, personalities, and history, Gotham City is the perfect place for a dark, urban adventure. Your game sessions will be that much more memorable if you take the time to make players feel like they are steeped in the atmosphere of this very special city. As the place works like a microcosm, it's the archetypal American metropolis gone rotten with violence, your heroes will very rarely leave the city limits, which, as they point out, is what we just talked about in that last section. And despite the vast choice of neighborhoods and settings Gotham City offers, downtown, the port, the suburbs, industrial zones, swamps, etc., you may still find yourself having a hard time varying your descriptions. The city does have many sides to it though, and here are 4 examples. 4 types of places to help vary your descriptions. Gotham City, the industrial city in crisis. Gotham City, the old British colony. Gotham City, the city of lights. And Gotham City, symptom and cause. Now, obviously, any official campaign setting is going to give you lots of different locations. What I really like about this one is that there are lots of different ways to characterize what is essentially the same location. And I think the reason it works is because Gotham City is a relatively condensed location. If you try to take this approach with something like the entirety of the Forgotten Realms, or even just the entirety of the Sword Coast, it would probably lead to maybe more mixed results. But then again, maybe you could come up with a few different ways to characterize the same setting. Maybe you could try that approach with the Forgotten Realms, or just the Sword Coast. Maybe you could try that with the city of Greyhawk, or the continent of Wildmount. And these different perspectives on the same location can serve as the doorway into new stories and a more varied array of stories. This advice actually helped me when running my Monster of the Week campaign. It's set in modern Los Angeles, but this helped me realize that I need to make sure that we're highlighting all the different aspects of that city in order to make sure that these adventures can help paint a broader picture of what the city is actually like. I started my campaign with a adventure focused on Hollywood and making movies and going to premieres, but then the second adventure was about werewolf white supremacists, and the third was about ranchers outside the city, because Los Angeles is not just one thing. So already this advice has been really valuable in my own game, even when I wasn't running a Gotham City campaign, because this approach is really valuable into making any location feel a lot more real and varied. Now, this game also very wisely assumes not everybody knows everything about the world it takes place in. I know that might sound crazy, but there are people who don't know a lot about the world of Batman, and they might be in your gaming group. So this is the next valuable insight the game offers. Different players have different levels of knowledge about your campaign setting. So how do you actually introduce them to the setting and tell them what they need to know? While playing, resist the urge to give them all the references of the books, games, and movies that you can think of. Giving someone a ton of homework to get through will do nothing for their knowledge during the game, and may well put them off playing altogether. Think of a fictional universe you don't know very well, and how isolated you would feel in the middle of a group of fans of that franchise. They might spew out endless references that are meaningless to you, but you don't have to do the same when explaining Gotham City to someone who knows nothing about it. Give new players information that every Gothamite knows, plus anything that their character might have gleaned from their daily life. Whatever's mysterious for the people around the character should be for them too. If there are contradictory versions or conspiracy theories, this is often the first thing that will come to mind for the average Gothamite. First of all, I really love the fact that this game is very explicit about saying, hey, don't give your players homework. They already have homework. You're making them play a game with more than 200 pages of rules. The fact that we're able to recruit anybody into this hobby is honestly kind of a miracle. But also that brings me to another larger point that I want to make, one that's really important to me. It is okay if your players have not watched or read or listened to your favorite piece of media that takes place in the fictional world of the game you're going to run for them. This is just like a pet peeve of mine in the world in general, specifically with nerds and geeks who cannot get their heads around the fact that not everyone has seen your favorite thing. I made a video about this way back in the first year of my channel, but I think a lot of us have this really unhealthy habit where our surprise that someone hasn't seen the thing that we love manifests in some toxic ways that might alienate our friends. Oh my god, you haven't seen this movie? What is wrong with you? Well, nothing. Or I don't know, maybe lots of things, but not because they haven't seen a movie. If you invite your friends to play in a Batman game with you, there might be a lot they don't know. The same might be true if they're playing in the Forgotten Realms, or Greyhawk, or even the Marvel Universe. They might not know things that you take for granted. Like, your players might not realize just how many Marvel villains are scientists. Dr. Doom, Dr. Connors, Dr. Octopus, the list goes on and on. That's actually the real reason Peter Parker can't ever grow up and get his life together. Because apparently in the Marvel Universe, the minute you get your degree, you turn into a supervillain.
Technically, Dr. Doom never got his degree. His face was badly scarred in a lab accident, and he left school. So because he never finished college, he never got his doctorate.
So wait, he's just a dictator who calls himself a doctor? He doesn't actually have a PhD?
No, he's just a D. The PH is silent.
That was a long walk. But the point is, it's okay if your players don't know anything about this setting. Don't force them to become experts before you start your campaign. Don't insist they can't play a game in the Forgotten Realms if they haven't read the Drizzt books, or in Dragonlance if they haven't read the Dragonlance books, or in the Star Wars universe if they haven't spent decades catching up with the expanded universe. Don't make your friends even watch The Rise of Skywalker for them to play in a Star Wars game. Let them come to Star Wars in their own way and watch what they want to watch. Don't turn anything into homework. Instead, just make sure that they know what they need to in order to function in this world. Which it might be hard for you to hear this, but they don't need to know everything. They literally just need to know the basics. Now, so far, the Gotham City RPG has established that it's okay to play in this game if you don't know everything about the world, and that newbies should still feel welcome to play. But of course, they correctly assume that some players will know a lot about the world. After all, even though technically speaking, nobody is born knowing anything about Batman, the folks at Warner Media have been doing everything in their power to make up for that fact. Even if not all your players are big Batman fans, I think it's reasonable to assume that most of them generally know that Bruce Wayne is Batman and that he's a billionaire, and they probably know his origin, although I'm not so sure about that last one. Has it ever appeared on screen? I'm not sure. So once you've taken our earlier advice and you've asked your players how much they know about the world, then the next question is, okay, what do they know as players that their characters would not know? I know what I don't know. However deep your knowledge of the city that your players will be steeped in, you have to run your games and write your scenarios taking into account the different levels of secrecy around your hero's adventure. There are open secrets that millions of us know: the identity of Batman, the location of the Batcave, Alfred's military past, the different Robins, etc. Others are not necessarily common knowledge. Mention White Rabbit, and connoisseurs will think of Jaina Hudson. Talk of the origins of Catwoman or Huntress, and some players will have the Mafia in mind. At any time, you should be able to remind your group of the difference between what we know and what the inhabitants of Gotham City know. For you, Bruce Wayne is a playboy billionaire who lost his parents in tragic circumstances. That's all. You are a mere guest at Wayne Manor like everyone else. There's no reason for you to start touching all the clocks you come across to try to find some secret passage. This situation may seem paralyzing or frustrating for the heroes, but in reality it can be quite enjoyable. Use it when playing out situations where secrets create a second meaning in every sentence. So this neatly lays out the dilemma that you're going to be dealing with anytime you run a game in a pre-existing world, especially where the source material is pretty popular. And I think the Bruce Wayne example is a really good one, because that kind of metagaming is really frustrating to me specifically. I've talked about metagaming a lot on this channel before, and I always appreciate when a player makes a very deliberate choice to ignore what their character already knows about a monster because they don't believe it's something their character would know. I actually tend to see this behavior a little bit more often in players who are also dungeon masters, because I suspect they already come to the game with some understanding that not everybody in the world would know everything about each monster, because that's how they think of their own games. They think a lot about what is common knowledge and what is not. But to be honest, I don't expect that from every player. If we're playing D&D and you've been playing for 10 years, you've been watching Critical Role for 10 years, you watch Dimension 20, you hang out on social media talking about the game, there's a chance you're going to know that fire damage to a troll is going to stop their regenerative powers. So, in the game, do you pretend you don't know that? Or do you just acknowledge that you have that information? Part of me still gets frustrated when the latter happens, when players, well, I guess when player characters seem to have more knowledge than I think they should. But at the end of the day, that only happens because I didn't sit my players down and explain what their characters would and would not know. They don't know how common trolls are, or how accessible that information would be to the average person, and I didn't do anything to properly let them know how I felt about that subject. That's why this advice is so important. Sure, your players probably know that Batman's true identity is secret. But in your version of Gotham, do most people even think Batman is real, or do they think he's an urban legend? Do they know that he has the kind of gear that you could only get with millions of dollars in R&D, or do they assume he just raided an army surplus store? What do they know about Bruce Wayne? Do most people think he's a well-meaning philanthropist or a rich, entitled douchebag? That is going to have a major impact on whether or not they think it's in character to vent to Bruce Wayne about their problems. Now, I think you could absolutely create situations where the player characters wind up in the same room as Bruce Wayne, and he gets a little overly curious about their mission, because what we know as players is that he's secretly trying to pump them for information so he can be Batman. And that can be fun to play that dramatic irony where the players know things that their characters don't. But another aspect of this discussion is, who are you playing? Because that's also going to impact how much your character knows about the world. Batman RPG is populated by characters whose every secret can be known by the players of the game, as long as they read the comics. That means that everyone playing has to respect a fundamental rule of role-playing games. All the characters, both heroes and NPCs, do not know what the players know and have to act accordingly. This may seem obvious for things as fundamental as Batman's secret identity. The difference between what the players and the characters know can turn out to be rather delectable. For example, when the heroes come face to face with a famous billionaire pretending to be irresponsible or awkward. However, some people could be tempted to cross that line. For example, going to talk to Bruce Wayne about their difficulties in the hope that Batman will intervene. In this situation, it's up to the GM to decide whether this approach will have the desired effect or be met with complete indifference. And while we would advise against encouraging such an attitude, the GM's choice will be based on what they want to concentrate on in the scenario, the motivations of the NPCs involved, and the amount of tolerance they are willing to have for this way of playing. For every well-known character, whether a crime fighter or a supervillain, your role as the GM will be to define what is common knowledge, what the newspapers and internet report, what only the police know or suspect, what only certain people in Gotham City know after discovering the secrets, like Hugo Strange or all the members of the Batman family for Bruce Wayne, what only the heroes are likely to learn through their investigation. The only rule is as follows. The GM decides exactly how much information is available, and this is only valid for the current scenario. And while we would advise respecting the main principles of most comics, like the fact that the Batman's training with Ra's al Ghul is only known by the League of Assassins, the GM is free to create a story revolving around a certain secret, or create an alternative Gotham City where this secret, in our example, the fact that Bruce Wayne was once the disciple of a sinister character like Ra's al Ghul, would be common knowledge. Freedom is one of the most important ingredients of a good role-playing game. I think breaking down in-world knowledge into different categories based on who you are is really smart because it gives your players a chance to basically choose off of a menu of experiences they want to have. For example, in a lot of Batman media, Batman is supposed to be this urban legend that nobody knows is actually real. I don't know that I've ever seen that handled particularly well since maybe Batman 89 was the last time I think I bought it, but most of the time that is meant to be the assumption. But obviously the cops know he's real. Well, now, immediately, if you tell your players that, you've given your players two options. Are they going to play a civilian who literally thinks Batman is just an urban myth? Or a cop who knows the truth? It's a plot point in the 1989 movie that there's a reporter looking into this, trying to investigate the Batman and prove that he's real, and Commissioner Gordon isn't answering any of his questions. We have a tension between those two groups in that story. Who do you want to play in that scenario? Do you want to play one of the few good cops in Gotham working with Batman, or at least working alongside Batman and trying to keep the reporters off your back? Or do you want to play the reporters, looking into Batman and following clues and trying to figure out if he's real and if he is, who he is? Now, there's another possible wrinkle that could get thrown into your campaigns. If you want to introduce some plot points that are actually intended to foreshadow an upcoming canon event, I know what happens to that character. In one of your game sessions, you might choose to present an NPC at a certain moment of their life. For example, Detective Renee Montoya before it is revealed she is a lesbian, or District Attorney Harvey Dent before the acid attack that transforms him into Two-Face. Your expert players will therefore be experiencing a different variant of I know what I don't know, this time related to the future of the character in question. Make sure they know that when you're in charge of a game, nothing is written in stone. The essential principle of an interactive game is to be able to change the course of things, even if that means creating a new version of Gotham City with your players, in a similar fashion to stories like Batman Earth 1 and other alternative worlds shown in the comics. Don't let the experts bring everyone down through fatalism or strictly sticking to the original storyline. You know what happens to Harvey Dent, but that's in a Gotham City where your characters don't exist. What do you do here and now knowing that there is this threat hanging over him? If your hero's actions stop Sal Maroni from disfiguring Dent, Two-Face won't exist. Or will exist later under different circumstances, but only in your game sessions. The supervillain will still be an interesting character, both for you and all the other fans out there around the world, but you can try creating a Gotham City where Dent continues fighting crime, something that will no doubt be fascinating for you and your group. If your expert just won't tolerate this, then perhaps it's time to renegotiate the contract between you and your players. Some fans are so blindly devoted to these characters and this world that they love that they have a hard time accepting the most important interactive element of a role-playing game. It doesn't need to be a problem, but it can be a hurdle for the other players in your group. If you really want to keep this expert in your group, make up plotlines where there's only a small risk that the history of the city or destiny of a major character will be modified. You'll still have an enjoyable time together. First of all, I love that the game fully calls out the uber nerds for not being able to get on board with a plot that might deviate from the established canon. They even made a whole Spider-Man movie about that. It was pretty good, but it is a real problem. And then the game offers a pathway to reconcile their desires with the rest of the parties. Now we have a solution. We have some suggestions for how to satisfy those fans while still running a satisfying session. In case you missed it, I want to underline what they're saying here. When they refer to the most important interactive element of a role-playing game, what they're talking about is just the idea that the player's decisions matter. And the thing is, we often hear stories about game masters struggling with this idea, right? Game masters who railroad their players or fail to create scenarios that incorporate any opportunities for the players to make their own decisions. But this is a situation where, if you don't intervene, some players might essentially railroad themselves. For example, let's imagine we're doing a campaign where Batman is still pretty young and fresh, and he's fighting a lot of his enemies for the first time. And I think it would be fun for him to fight the Red Hood gang at Ace Chemical Plant, because I think it would actually be fun for Batman to really experience being responsible for the Joker's origin story. But then, as soon as my players see the Red Hood gang in Ace Chemical, one of my players cuts in and says,
Joker's origin story is that he was the Red Hood, and he got knocked into a vat of acid at Ace Chemical. Mike's trying to recreate the Joker's origin story, so we have to make sure that happens. So we have to find the leader and knock him into the acid.
Okay. How is that fun for anyone now? If my players want there to be absolutely no question that the Red Hood will become the Joker, then we need to talk about that before the campaign starts, and I won't put them in a situation like this where they might cause that to not happen. But if I put that scenario in front of my players, then I need to be okay with them changing the canon, but that only works if they understand that they're free to do so. Heck, even if they tried to knock the Red Hood into the acid to make sure the canon event plays out the way it's supposed to, this is a dice-based game. What if they just can't roll above a 5 all night and they can't land a hit on any of the gangsters? Now we have a new scenario where the Joker doesn't exist and the Red Hood does, and we have to figure out what that means. And on the other hand, my players could knock a few different Red Hood gang members into the acid, and now I've got 3 Jokers. What am I supposed to do with 3 Jokers? 3 Jokers is a bad idea. But you know what? That's what can happen if I let my players participate in the canon events. We all have to be willing to roll with the punches, or we just shouldn't set our adventures this far back in the timeline. Now, it's possible that my funny little Three Jokers reference went over your head, and that's completely fine. I'm obviously not recommending that comic. But more to the point, not everybody has the same amount of knowledge about the Batman universe, and even if they have a similar amount of knowledge, they may not share knowledge on the same subjects. Two people might be experts in the same amount of Batman, but have read completely different comics from each other. And the same goes for the worlds of Fallout, or Doctor Who, or the Marvel Universe. But that brings us to our next topic. What if you, the game master, don't really know the world all that well? This is something I've been very critical of in the Forgotten Realms books for 5th edition, both the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, and especially the published adventures that took place in the Forgotten Realms. This is not a commentary on the new Forgotten Realms books. I haven't read them yet, and I really hope they've solved this problem. Hopefully they've done a better job of presenting the GM with the information they need to know, or at least they've empowered game masters to feel like they can take ownership of the world. It's something I feel like they do a much better job of with the Greyhawk material in the Dungeon Master's Guide. Is there more to Greyhawk than what's in those 20 pages or so? Undoubtedly, obviously. But that section of the DMG gave me enough information that I could run the city of Greyhawk very confidently. I had a home base, and I had some rough details about the world. That was basically all I needed.
You know, there are people out there who make lore videos about Greyhawk and the Forgotten Realms. Those might be helpful for a new game master who wants to run their games in an established setting.
Oh, absolutely. But those are an invaluable resource, but my frustration has always been with the limited amount of information included in the books themselves. But here's the thing. As this Gotham game points out, it's okay to not have all the information about this entire setting. Don't let that hold you back from running games in this world. And what if you don't really know the world of Batman? For 81 years now, creators, scriptwriters, artists, cinematographers, video game designers, etc., have been helping to enrich the world of Gotham City, so it's quite normal for a GM to feel intimidated when imagining and then bringing to life an adventure in such a dense, rich, and heavily documented world as Batman's. There are, however, a few simple principles that will help you to feel as at ease in this role-playing game as in any other. Find your inspiration. Without necessarily taking a deep dive into every detail of Gotham City, you'll probably feel the need to find some sources of inspiration, whether it's comic books, movies, TV shows, or any other work of fiction that uses the city as a backdrop and seems to correspond with what you were looking for, just as you would for any other role-playing game inspired by an original work. There are so many comics with diverse approaches, atmospheres, and focuses that you are sure to find something that fits with what you want to do. If necessary, feel free to inform players of the atmosphere you have chosen for your adventure. It can be anything from the flamboyant, fun Batman of certain cartoons to the darkest, depressing version of Gotham City. The amount of realism or prevalence of supernatural elements can also be explained to players, as without such information they may not approach the atmosphere, clues, and events you have created in the same manner. You can also use the context of a particular comic series like Rebirth or New 52. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Whatever the role-playing game, the GM is never infallible. You are probably not an expert, and while it's important to respect the world the story is based in, if only because it serves as a common reference for everyone playing, you have to avoid feeling paralyzed at the idea of committing the slightest mistake about Robin's favorite pizza or the number of windows in Wayne Tower. The guide to Gotham City is there to help you, and there are a ton of details to be found in comic books. For the rest, simply use your imagination anytime you don't know the specifics of something your players ask about, or something you need to create the adventure. You just have to endeavor to stick to the world of the Dark Knight and make your answer believable. Remember that the most important thing is not the details, but the adventure that your heroes are going to experience in the Gotham City you have created. And finally, consider your Gotham City unique. Your role as a GM is not to contribute to the collective work that has been built by DC Comics over the course of more than 80 years, but to build an adventure that takes place in Gotham City that your players can enjoy. Your role is to use the rich source material to inspire your creativity, not to feel restricted by everything that the artists have created over the decades because you take it as some sort of dogma that it has to be respected. If it helps, think of your version of Gotham City as just that. Yours. It's a place where things may be slightly different from the comic books, and that's okay. Who's to say how the city will evolve? I honestly wish this advice was printed in every official campaign setting for every tabletop game, including games like D&D. Now, I will acknowledge that for decades, the whole appeal of every campaign setting in D&D, especially worlds like Greyhawk, was not just that it was yours, but that you actually shared it with the community. Obviously, plenty of people customize their Greyhawk and Forgotten Realms games all the time, but you also had the Living Greyhawk initiative, where the actions of the players all took place in the same world, and they had an impact on upcoming events that everyone would participate in some way. But we're certainly at the point now in the hobby where most game masters are really the stewards for their own versions of these official settings. And that means that we should empower GMs to make it their own. Don't worry about the old handbooks, don't worry about the wikis, don't worry about the videos recapping decades of lore.
Even though they're really great videos.
Instead, just decide what is true about your version of the realms, your version of Greyhawk, your version of the worlds of Star Wars or Star Trek or Invincible. Now, in the case of Gotham City, I almost feel like this goes without saying to a certain degree, just because Gotham has been reinterpreted so many different ways just within my own lifetime. But man, I opened this video talking about the imposter syndrome I felt when running these official established worlds. So I wish I had always felt so empowered to do this with those settings, because it's honestly something that had taken me a long time to get comfortable doing. Although part of the reason for that isn't just because of what I personally know or don't know, but because of what my players might know that I don't. How do I handle it when someone in my game knows more about this world than I do? How to handle experts and newbies. The Gotham City presented to inspire you for use in this role-playing game is as close as possible to the one seen in the DC Comics, but certain choices still had to be made about the era represented, although this can be changed, the details of the map, the illustrations, so starting with the size of Batman's ears, the differences from one adventure to another regarding the description of a place or character, how to fill in the blanks of what the existing stories have never described. We offer a playable version of Gotham City based on and faithful to the comics, but it would be impossible for this version to correspond exactly to all other versions presented in the graphic novels or depicted in the movies and video games. One thing is sure, as GM, you are likely to encounter players ready to debate minute details of your descriptions. Even worse, your expert players might start squabbling between themselves over the number of floors at Wayne Tower, Alfred's year of birth, or the materials used to manufacture Batman's gadgets. This is a complex universe depicted in many different ways, with millions of fans, so your knowledge might sometimes be lacking or disputed. Here are a few pieces of advice for dealing with difficult players who think they are experts in Gotham City. How many years ago did Bruce Wayne become Batman? When did he fight Joker for the first time? When did he recruit Robin in his adventuring timeline? How long were they partners before Batman got a second Robin? How old is Batman? How much money does he actually have? These are nonsense questions. They don't matter, but there are nerds who think they do, and they'll cling to old comics or cartoons or editorial mandates from behind the scenes as evidence of their matterness. And of course, you'll find people just like this if you play in any campaign setting. There will always be someone out there who knows the world better than you. And also, it is important to them that you need to know just how wrong you are about the world. And as the book points out, don't try to argue with these folks. That doesn't help anyone. Impose your vision and allow yourself a margin of error. Above all, don't get into a sterile argument with your players about sources and proof. It will not bring anything positive to the game. As a GM, you already have enough to handle without the additional stress of proving that your descriptions are correct, and it will only get in the way of you running and managing the game session. Your vision of Gotham City does not have to be 100% aligned with what others have drawn or filmed. It should exist to serve the game experience that you have created. Prepare your sessions well, but always concentrate on the quality of the adventure rather than encyclopedic precision. If you make a mistake in a description, remember that inconsistencies are super important and can be a chance for you to progress. You're allowed to make mistakes, especially when you are improvising so many details during a scenario. Learn from your mistakes and have fun. If an anomaly arises that poses a serious problem for the current intrigue or the realism for the characters, it's probably better to own up to your mistake and set the action off with the description corrected. Your role as the narrator and referee should never be perceived as authoritarian. I really like that this advice does not say, try to beat them with facts and logic. Because who does that help? That sort of debate is okay in fan spaces where I can point out that actually, in Star Wars, Coyote-Mundi's birthday was no longer canon because that was from the Legends timeline, and also at one point in 1999, Coyote-Mundi was referred to as the only Jedi Knight on the Council who wasn't a Master, and then that got retconned for Revenge of the Sith, so we've already changed his past a little bit, even from that same era, and also, who the fuck cares about Coyote-Mundi? You don't, you say you do, but you don't, you're just bitching to bitch. But that is not a very productive conversation to have with your friends at the table. So as the book suggests, just don't get into the weeds. It's not productive. And the book presents 3 main ways to handle the situation. The first is preventative. Avoid putting your game in situations where you can get easily called out for getting stuff wrong. Use the gaps in the fiction. In real life, it's often very easy to check the details of a description through direct witnesses or other evidence. However, a fictional city, even one as intricately described as Gotham City, will always be incomplete by its very nature, meaning there is always the possibility of creating a small space where the only references are your imagination and a sense of realism. If you don't feel at ease in a neighborhood or building that has often been described in the adventures of the Batman family, sidestep the problem. Have the action take place in a part of Wayne Manor that is undergoing renovation, an annex of the GCPD located a block away from the central precinct, or another location that only exists in your scenario. For an event that does not need to take place at a precise location, choose the classic, at the corner of Dakota and Williams, i.e., 2 minor streets that you have invented and will not be the subject to a pedantic player commenting, "There's no bank there, it's a Martha's Deli," or, "But that street has been one way since 1998. I talked about another version of this in my last video. Like, hey, if you want to play a Star Wars game but you don't want people bitching in your ear about canon, just set the game on a new planet, include all new characters, If you want to include some iconic characters, but you don't want to risk the chance that somebody will butt in with their 2 cents about what is and is not canon and what does or does not make sense, just make up new characters to fill those same roles. However, I honestly think the better approach is just to tell the story you want to tell. But then what do you do when somebody calls you out? Sure, you can just declare you have authorship over the world. That's a neat idea. But when it comes to actual conflict resolution at the table, what do you say? Like, let's say I'm running my Batman campaign and we're doing a Court of Owls adventure, and when the players ask about the court's motivations, I say, well, that's simple. They want to control Gotham City and use it to gain more wealth and power. Then one of my players chimes in and says,
Actually, the Court of Owls doesn't just want power and control. They're also a cult of Barbados, the ancient bat god who rules the dark multiverse.
Okay, I didn't know that. So how do I respond? A few ways to reply to a self-proclaimed expert on Gotham City. Teaching mode. You know, there are various versions of this world, but here we're playing in my Gotham City with the details I want to describe. Feel free to create your own scenario, and then we'll play in your Gotham City. Yes, but mode. Yes, you're right, there actually was a pizza place linked with the Maroney family on the corner of Pringle and 17th Street, but Firefly burned it to the ground a few months ago. Not everything that happens in Gotham City is in the comics. Procrastination mode. How about you note down everything that's not right in my descriptions and send it to me tomorrow, okay? Sarcasm mode. Where'd you read that? Oh, in a comic book? You know, the guys behind those would invent anything to sell a few more copies. What we have here is the real Gotham City. What do you trust more? What we're playing through right now, or what some artist dreamed up for a magazine? Ultimatum mode. We can double check everything if you like. I have 400 comic books for us to go through. But if we do, we'll have to stop the session. This is a role-playing game, not Wikipedia. Again, this should be in every TTRPG book, or at the very least, every setting book. Now, when it comes to these specific responses, unsurprisingly, my favorite is teaching mode, where you remind them that you're running this game and this is your world, and it's not always going to line up perfectly, so if there's something they're passionate about, they should run their own game, and you'd be happy to be a player in it. I like that it essentially encourages your players to run their own games in a roundabout way, but also it is a little passive-aggressive, which I think is unavoidable in this context, but it's not as bad as it could be. I also like procrastination mode if they're bringing up something that you genuinely think you got wrong and you want to get right. And I also enjoy ultimatum mode. Look, man, we could spend all day Googling this, or we could play some fucking D&D. Which one do you want us to do? Now, the tricky thing about ultimatum mode is that it does kind of tell your players, look, I don't care about this, and I don't care if you know that or not. I'm running this game, and I do not care how much it matches up with the world you know and love. I think teaching mode says basically the same thing, but in what I think is a more productive way. Also, there are certain situations where ultimatum mode is absolutely the right way to go because it reminds them that it seems like the only way they'd be comfortable with you proceeding is if you do a whole bunch of homework first, and that is not why you're all at the table together. Although I will say, I do enjoy yes but mode and sarcasm mode because they both seem to imply that the comics are generally credible artifacts from this fictional world, but that you have extra details that they do not. And weirdly, I think there are some franchises where this would absolutely work a lot better. Like, the whole premise of the Forgotten Realms used to be that it was linked to our world, and we would just receive limited information about it every time Elminster got baked with Ed Greenwood. So it might depend on the setting, and it also might depend on what I'm getting wrong. For example, I'm not at all worried about getting the geography for Gotham wrong, because I think that city has been reinterpreted so many times, it does not matter. In my lifetime, I've seen Gotham City placed in like 4 different East Coast states, for one thing, in various different adaptations. It seems to have finally canonically landed in New Jersey, but I've seen it all over the map. Literally. However, if I try to express some sort of clever legal argument in character, District Attorney Harvey Dent makes a clever legal claim, or the Penguin has a particularly slippery bit of defense, and one of my players points out that that's not how the law works even a little bit, okay, that's when I might have some trouble dismissing out of hand. But again, I would feel comfortable using one of these methods. Like, okay, let me know what I'm getting wrong, let's write it down, and let's talk after the game. Maybe some of these laws are just a little bit different in Gotham. And in other cases where this argument is actually going to matter a whole lot for my campaign, maybe I need to understand the law just a little bit more. And the same could go for lots of things that I just might not have a lot of expertise in, personally, like chemistry, biology, geology, criminology, psychology, sociology, finances, automotive repair, just, you know, off the top of my head. But there is one more way you might be able to respond when you have your own Mr. Know-It-All in your party. Use the expert for the good of the group. Not all experts are confrontational players. Let's imagine that you don't have in-depth knowledge of Gotham City, and your group of players includes a mega fan of the adventures of the Dark Knight. Check with this person when creating the heroes so that their expertise serves everyone without taking them out of the experience. For example, their heroine is a native Gothamite who grew up in the Narrows and is now part of high society. So it's normal that they are able to endow the other heroes, who may have just arrived from Bloodhaven or Metropolis, with their encyclopedic knowledge of the history and geography of the city. Feel free to let them add to certain descriptions. When you get out of the taxi, you'll discover the famous Wayne Tower. Debbie, please do tell us a little bit more about it. This transfer of expertise from a player to their character is also useful if your scenario involves players being members of the GCPD, and one of the players has in-depth legal or criminal knowledge. Talk with them about it, and if possible, encourage them to play a member of Internal Affairs, or someone who has to train a group of rookie cops. During the game, if you have to describe the details of a procedure that you don't understand, you can let this player take over. Of course, your colleagues turn to you to find out what they should do. What do you tell them? Remember, the people who are passionate about this setting and are really vocal about it aren't just trying to be pedantic assholes. Okay, if they're on Twitter, yes, they're trying to be assholes. If they're at your game table, well, they're doing this because they love the setting. They put a lot of energy into remembering details from this world, or they just absorbed all these details organically because they love these stories. To them, the best way to express love for these stories is to have this sort of ability to recall information, to have this encyclopedic knowledge about the world. And as a result, they feel rewarded whenever this continuity is acknowledged within the story. I want to be clear. If that's the only thing you care about these stories, that it corresponds with canon, that's when it becomes a problem. A story does not have virtue because it honors canon. Stories are about more than that. But if you enjoy these stories for other reasons, like themes and characters and all that basic shit, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with also having an encyclopedic knowledge of a bunch of details. These kinds of players don't have to be your enemy. They can instead be an incredibly valuable asset. For example, if I'm running a Star Wars game, I don't know anything about all the different ships. I don't want to sit down and study which made-up ships are faster, which ones are stronger, whatever, who cares? Well, someone in my group might. And so if I'm running a scene where an NPC has to describe the specs of their ship and how fast and strong they are, whatever, I'm rocketing towards that imposter moment. Rocketing, spaceships, that's funny. But there might be a point in the story where the players want to hire a ship captain to take them somewhere, and I want them to have a few different options of who to hire. So what I might do is just have a bunch of ship captains make their cases, have them insist to the players that they each have the best ship in the galaxy, and then if one of my players is actually an expert in these Star Wars ships, let them help make the decision about which ship to charter. They can talk to their players and say, okay, this ship has better firepower, this ship is faster, this ship has better armor, whatever. So which is more valuable to us? What do we need in this mission? Also, this captain said his ship is the fastest, but it's not. This one is. So that means this guy's probably a liar. Do we want to work with him if we can't trust him? Then they can have their discussion. They can pick their ship, and then once they've made their decision, I can just learn about that one ship. I can study its stats, and that's fine. I can do a little bit of research as necessary for the campaign. But most importantly, that player feels like their knowledge mattered. This is such good advice. It drives me crazy that it is only in this book that no one has ever heard of. So please, take this video, share it with everyone you can think of, and let people know that if you want to run a game in a pre-existing fictional world, you don't have to be scared of the hardcore fans, like I was. You don't have to force yourself to do a lot of research, like I want to do. You don't have to avoid running that setting for that player, like I've done, because they know it better than you do. Instead, just look at all the ways this Batman RPG has solved this problem for all of us. If you're anything like me, you have been grappling with this problem for a long time now. And this advice might be exactly what you needed to hear. And speaking of which, speaking of solving our problems by using someone else's insight as an asset, Mr. Know-It-All.
Yes, influencer?
You said you're an expert in all things Gotham City, right?
I am indeed.
Well, I'm wondering if you could help me out with something. If I wanted to pick up a Batman comic for the first time and start reading Batman, where should I start?
Oh, where do I begin? First of all, you've got to start with Batman Year One. It reimagines Batman's origin story, and it's basically the template that everyone has been using for the past 4 decades, but it actually still holds up. Then the next story that happens in Batman's timeline is Batman and the Monster Men, which is out of print, but it's getting reprinted in July. Then the next story you should read is Batman and the Mad Monk. Both of those are written by Matt Wagner, and they retell some classic Golden Age comic book stories, but reimagined through a modern lens. Then you should really check out The Man Who Laughs, where Ed Brubaker tells Joker's first story from the 1940s. Then you should check out The Long Halloween and Dark Victory, and those are sort of unofficially the Batman stories for Year 2 and Year 3. There were actually some other storylines called Year 2 and Year 3, but you don't need to read those.